Our next speaker is Marcus Novak. Marcus is a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, School of Media Arts and Technology, and the founding director of the TransLab. His speech title is Entangled AllobioEcologies, Latent Architectures in Liquid Space. Please join me in welcoming Marcus. Hello, Marcus.
Thank you. And can everyone see my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. So hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And it's been an exciting conference all the way through, as much as I can from far away. I wish I was there with you. Let's jump in. There are some really nice points of connection with what Lev just described, so I'm enjoying it. And here we are, International Conference on Art and AI. Let me just make sure there we go. Okay, these are some of the questions that we were sent as a starter. Is AI art a challenge to human creativity? What are the aesthetics of machine creativity? What can AI art teach AI ethics? And we'll come to these. In a certain sense, everything is actually in this title, if you could unpack it, and I will. But entangled refers to the quantum world. Ecologies are clear. Bioecologies are clear. The allo is the alien, the other, the acceptance of the other. And it's interesting that the alien played in Lev's version too. And then beneath that, there are some other terms, latent, which is a big part of all sorts of AI right now, latent architectures and liquid space. Liquid space is computational fluid dynamics, and how we really know the world from the liquid to the atmosphere to the cosmic. We really compute everything as if it were a great liquid. And it's also a metaphor that we've used regarding architecture, but also regarding modernity and many other kinds of things. And some of these things that I'll be talking about today were developed for other related talks. So this one in particular was at the Bartlett, and it was playing with some notions. So you'll see a little permutation of terms, liquid architectures and latent space, and then AI and machine learning for media field navigation and selective reality substitution. Strange ideas that we're going to unpack. But here's what you want to see. There was a rather well-known essay of mine called Liquid Architectures in Cyberspace in '91. This is playing with it, saying latent architectures in liquid space. And then we have the title of the talk. And there's something being pointed to. So let's take a look at that. This was in China 5 days ago, I understand. And it's the Chinese drone that's on Mars right now, the Zhurong, I believe it's pronounced. And it's here because I would like to suggest that the question of AI art and AI in general in 2021, with both the Zhurong and the Ingenuity on Mars at the same time, with NASA congratulating China for its great success. At this point in time, the question of the AI can't be seen from a terrestrial point of view. We have to try to answer the question as if we were aliens. What would aliens think of art if they came and looked at the planet and looked at all of its history and all of its output and tried to decide what art could be, whether it was art or whether it was AI art or any other kind of art? And when I say alien, it could be another organism, but it could be an alien AI, for all we know. How would these questions be understood differently if we looked at them from the perspective of something beyond the Earth, something extraterrestrial, something alien? And so with that in mind, here is Mars, a sunrise on Mars. And you see a kind of landscape. And here's another kind of landscape, which is just a normal terrestrial texture, concrete and paint and stains, both of them creating a kind of world at very different scales and different distances. And I want to use those as a kind of notion of bringing us into the other, with a notion from psychology of the Umwelt, which is the way the world looks to an organism on its own terms. And I like this photograph for a lot of reasons. I like, for instance, the intensity in the eyes, the sort of very intense focus, and then the grasping of the talons. And I don't know, you can check it out for yourself. My impression is that when we see this, we see the intensity and we empathize with it. And then we see the claws and we can feel our hands becoming claws. And then we have to pause, because the claws are not the hands of this bird. They're the feet of this bird, and its hands are its wings. And for us to actually feel the intelligence of the bird and its actual reality of living, its Umwelt, we would have to jump out of the window, intensely hoping to catch something with our feet and holding our hands up in the air and hoping to fly with them, which is very not human, but very ordinary for the bird. And so we can imagine this creature in a different kind of Umwelt, and then we can think of other Umwelts of our own, of human ones. So this is obviously a nature scene, and of course Mars. And then you have this, which is that the nature scene is a photograph of Athens. It's a photograph, so it can't be very old. I mean, it's as old as photography at the most, but it's a scene that would have been familiar to the ancient Greeks. Like, for all that time, this is still as it would have been for 2,500 years, and then all of a sudden it's no longer that. So even though it's near, it's also far, it's also alien, and we'll come back to that. And so I'm going to explain an arc of thoughts that's going to bring us back to art, but it's going to start with more tangible things and get progressively more abstract. So both Kostas and I have been collaborating with a group called World 16 and a company in Japan called Forum 8 that studies autonomous driving and VR and CAD and simulation and all these kinds of things. And we get together and we do certain kinds of research, and we've been doing this for several years, actually. So one of the things that's come out of this is a notion that I call selective reality substitution. And it involves AI and machine learning and navigating through fields. Right now, we're communicating through a media field, through Wi-Fi, through Zoom, through all the devices that actually make this communication possible. And then some idea of a reverse stereoscopic process that can generate cities. And some of the ideas of this are, the kind of environment we live in. So we have noise, more and more noise in our culture, and we have noise canceling headphones, and we have noise visually. And so we can imagine noise canceling environments. And in fact, that's actually happening with new autonomous vehicles that can drive themselves and become screens that you drive in. And this is a patent that's already several years old from Apple, who is trying to create devices by which you could be driving and perceiving yourself to be in another environment, and even having a meeting in a vehicle that is driving by itself, and the participants can see themselves being in different kinds of landscapes. And so with that in mind, I started exploring various kinds of things and connecting them to Google Deep Dream and TensorFlow and things of the kind. And the first things with something like this are to try to just modify reality a little bit, and basically modify something pictorially, which is interesting enough. A little bit further, this company makes urban simulators, so they're very handy for this kind of experimentation. You can take a part of Tokyo and the way it's normally rendered realistically and begin to mess with it, to actually begin to change it. And then you can begin to involve more of the kinds of AI things like recognition and tracking and gaze tracking. So in this little example, we're going through the simulator and the focus is shifting according to wherever I'm looking. And then depending on where I'm looking, seems to lag a little bit, but here it is. Depending on where I'm looking, things are either represented as they are, if I want them to, or they get replaced by other kinds of objects. And so you can see that. So this is a simple little proof of concept that shows that you can do that. And it's the kind of thing that cars do and will do increasingly. Now, one thing to understand at this point is that cars, autonomous vehicles, are going to be probably the most powerful mainstream encounter with serious AI. They're going to be the supercomputer that everybody owns that's capable of doing these kinds of things and connecting in a kind of full sense. So with that, going a little further, this is a more realistic scene, and this is the same scene modified and more modified. And what happens after a while when you're doing this kind of thing is you realize that you can really modify reality a lot, and the human brain will persist and understand depth and relationship and character and figure and all sorts of things. And so that led to a sequence of further thoughts, which wound up being called selective reality substitution, and the notion that you might render different levels of reality, like you rendered levels of detail, and you might begin to imagine things as having a hard reality and a soft reality, and in this case, a driver or a passenger reality. But some things would need to be constant and some things would need to not be. And this is where AI and machine learning and extended reality, VR and AR, would be helpful. And then things get really, really strange. So this looks very, very distorted, but actually if you're in it, you can perceive everything you want perfectly well, or you can be in a swirl of this redness. And you can actually, if this were a video, you would be able to see that the masses of the buildings and all the things that are necessary are recognizable. And there's object recognition and character recognition and people recognition and vehicle recognition and all of that inside here. Then the pandemic came and we had to be masked. And there was time to actually dive in a little bit deeper, especially with GANs, generative adversarial networks and latent space, and to go to some stranger places. So this is the kind of typical GAN arrangement. There's a lot of world and there's a lot of information in the world, some kind of database, and it gets encoded and compressed into a latent space and then eventually decompressed and decoded into the reconstructed image. And if you tell the program to navigate in the latent space, then it begins to dream or hallucinate or produce these kinds of things that we find compelling because they've been brought into this proximity. So we can spend time understanding that, and then if we do, we can begin to actually code it. And so, this is, I'm not going to show you all the technical stuff, but there's a lot of that. And then you can do that in 2D. You can do it in 3D. If you have a differentiable render, you can work backwards from 3D and go back and forth and start to hallucinate things in 3D. And from that, you could take images, and from those images make 3D forms, and so on and so forth. And in that space, you can now begin to interpolate even objects and make the AI or machine learning part anyway productive in this kind of way, which is not human, but it's distinctly productive. And then the same kind of logic applies to attractiveness or affect or feeling. And this is someone who's collaborating with Forum 8 and more of the sort of under the hood tool making. And this goes on for a bit. And then there's this other kind of AI, which is the not only the style transfer, but the part where the AI is taught to make sense of input that doesn't have sense, and it just forces that back. So when you put these things together, you have the sort of previous step encountering style transfer and producing imagery like this, which, however, retains the dimensionality that was there in the original piece. So you start with this, and it turns into these things. And curiously, these are still reality. The brain just says, okay, that's reality. And everything that you're seeing here looks now three-dimensional, atmospheric. And here's the more hand-drawn or more arbitrary, and that can be made to yield, and even to yield potentially narrative images and paintings that actually do look like Malevich in some way, now that I think of it, and so on. And you get to this point, and this is where things are actually most interesting to me. This is a stereo pair, just a normal stereo pair of segmented scenes that are segmented for computer vision. And if you know how to look at them, you can see in depth. Like I can do it, I can see it in 3D right now, or maybe you can. Now, what would happen if you did style transfer to each of these images, left and right, and saw the effect? And the curious thing is that it works. The curious thing is that you see the depth. The brain is extracting valid three-dimensional information, and in fact, there are processes by which we can extract the point cloud from this information and reconstitute a 3D model of this reality that's made by this strange logic. And it's surprising just how far you can go with this. So all of these things have a corresponding three-dimensional reality. And this goes more into the segmentation. Here's some more segmentation. And you can see the continuity that's possible. Here's a segmented streets, city scene and what is done. And here's a more normal scene with more normal style transfer. And you would think that this is just there as a painterly thing, but here's what happens when you do it to both sides, and everything now becomes three-dimensional. So all the things that don't correspond either become more volumetric massing in the buildings, or they become increasingly atmospheric. They become smoke and fog and things that we find in the air. And you never lose yourself. You can still drive through Tokyo. Here's Jackson Pollock, and you can still see it in here. And this goes on. Here's a series of them for comparison. And it almost doesn't matter how far you push it. If there's a little bit of correlation, the brain accepts it as a place. So yeah, this is the same kind of explanation for the 2D. Then you can take that to 3D, and now you would do it, instead of doing it with pixels, you would do it with voxels, and there's a whole long chain, and you can extract from the voxels actual three-dimensional forms. And those three-dimensional forms, in this case, this is in progress, so it's going to get much, much more detailed, but it's made specifically to address work like this by Kobe Himmelblau, who is also working with AI, and they have something called Deep Himmelblau. This isn't done with Deep Himmelblau, but they're actually feeding their program the same data so that they can go through and generate new designs from the previous. And okay, let's not forget where we were, where we started. Is AI art a challenge to human creativity? What are the aesthetics of machine creativity? What does this have to do with ethics? AI art and AI ethics. And so now we're going to shift gears a bit. This particular little creature is actually in response to Rafiq's work. It's a very similar kind of notion of taking data through these latent spaces and applying it to a computational data-driven fluid and producing, swirling things, which I can't show you right now, but this is one of them. And other ones like it. I'll explain why I can't show you in a little bit. So liquid architectures in cyberspace is where we started. That was written in 1991, and there was a strange phrase in it. Cyberspace is poetry inhabited, and to navigate through it is to become a leaf on the wind of a dream. 1991, cyberspace was data space. Poetry inhabited was the same kind of navigation through latent space. And the leaf on the wind of the dream was exactly the kind of hallucination, we're calling it these days, that we see when we use this software and we see the images melt into one another. I use this poetic phrase, but it was 1991. I didn't know at that point we didn't have the computational power. Interestingly, 30 years later, Patrick Schumacher, who is now the head of Zaha Hadid Architects, conceded, it took 30 years, but he actually conceded that cyberspace architecture was going to be the future of an architecture or of a part of it. So, well, it's good that it's catching up, but in the meantime, life continues. So we have liquid architectures in latent space. It's a different thing. And we can modify the phrase in 2021 and say that latent space is poetry inhabited, and to navigate through it is to become a leaf on the wind of a dream. But we can go farther. And to go farther, we need to remember AlphaGo. Now, AlphaGo is the game where the computer AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol, and everybody is writing and praising Move 37, in which the computer AlphaGo, the program, made a move that no human would have made, that was meant to or seen to indicate computer creativity. Well, I think it was impressive, but I'm more interested, and I think it's more relevant to today's talk, to think about Move 78 in the fourth game, where Lee Sedol defeated AlphaGo. Because at that point, the computer had trained for thousands and thousands of cycles against itself and based on human knowledge. And Lee Sedol had only played it 3 previous times. And in the 4th time, he defeated it. And the point here is that it's a neural net. It's learning. It's very impressive. But we are neural nets too. And we're not going to be passive about what is happening. We are actually going to learn. And maybe we'll compete or maybe we'll collaborate. But we are going to change by our encounter with all of this. And so we're trying to answer this question. And before we can, we have to actually say something more specific about what art is, or what architecture is, or what intelligence is, and even what the artificial is. And suppose I had a database like this. Okay, so this is a database of pictures of Greece from the 19th century, of Athens, of the Parthenon. Now, suppose I gave this to an AI to learn something from it. Well, it would be really easy for the AI to learn something morphological or formal. It could make forms like this from it. But that would miss the point, because what you would need the computer to understand in order to be intelligent would be not the shapes. It would need to understand the culture that produced the shapes. Why? Why did they go to the trouble of building something that would last 2,500 years? Why would they go to this extraordinary precision to make it geometrically perfect? Why did they do that when they knew they were going to die and this thing would outlive them? And so, you look at this and you begin to answer it. And the answer is, if you're an architect, a young architect starts designing a house, maybe the house for themselves or for their mother or something like that. Then they think of the site. Then they might think of a city. Eventually, over time, they'll realize that the things that they design affect the people who live in them. They're designing the citizens. And over time, they will realize that architecture, as I think the ancient Greeks realized, and I think the Chinese and many, many cultures realized, that it's a privileged communication with the future. You design something to last 2,500 years because you have something to tell the future in 2,500 years. And it's true, in Greece and in many countries, that those things that become the patrimony are valued and they help define the culture as a culture. And that's what the AI would need to understand. And that's what the alien would see if the alien were honest and said, what is art on Earth? And what about art? Well, art is similar. Basically, if you say that it's aesthetics, you're saying it's just the object. If you can say something critical, it's the situation. But in fact, the art isn't in the object. The art is in the insight that the object produces in the mind of the viewer. If an artwork is powerful, it changes the viewer's neurons. It changes their mind. And if it's really powerful, it becomes an exemplar, a privileged communication with the future. It talks to the future. That's why we have museums. That's why Lev is talking about Malevich, as I do, because Malevich told us something that continues to be relevant, and an AI would need to say something relevant to the future if it can. Okay, so you would have to say that the missions of AI art would be something AI to the level of the object, the aesthetic, or to the situation, the critical, but eventually to the insight of both the human and the AI, and then an exemplar to both the human and the AI and everything else. Okay, and so now we begin to mix these things, liquid arts and latent space, latent arts in liquid space, and so on. Now, why is this important? And I'm doing pretty well, I think. This phrase means gods from machines, like Deus ex machina, but plural, salvatores mundi, meaning saviors of the world. And it's the notion that in every generation, people look to their technology to save them. And now we're looking to AI to save us. Salvator Mundi was the Leonardo da Vinci painting that was sold for $437 million. Salvador Dali is obviously the surrealist painter who announced he was going to become very, very wealthy because he was going to play the system. And Salvador DLAI is my own little game, seeing the letters, which is Salvador Dali, but DL is deep learning and AI is artificial intelligence. And all of that, all these saviors are to connect the discussion about Beeple and the NFT and the artwork that was sold by NFT for, was it $67 million? And the arguments around that, well, it's about the thermodynamics of scarcity, that you have to compute these things, that things become scarce, and the aura of the past is now a kind of computational difficulty of finding a non-fungible token when you go mining for it, and a connection back to the piece, and so on. Now, actually, there's some truth in the thermodynamics, but it's a little more interesting. Entropy is at the heart of it, and the distinct difference between the unique and the rare is important, and it needs to be understood. And everything in the world is unique, but only few things are rare. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that the alien that would look back on art on the planet, whether it was done by AI or by human, could and would be looking at the objectively rare, not the subjectively rare, which is infinite, but the objectively rare. And what does that mean? And that means that it exists, and it's something that makes something possible in emerging. That's from Stuart Kaufman, the notion of the adjacent possible. It's a really great idea. But let me just make this very, very tangible, which is how we understand the thermodynamics and how entropy works. The reason entropy works is because that there are more ways to get 7 if you roll dice than to get 2 or 12. There's only one way to get a 2 and only one way to get a 12, but there are 6 ways to get a 7. That means that there is an objective difference in the world. And more than that, it means if you have a reason to prefer 2s or 12s, one is better than the other. So there's a gradient. Not only is the difference real, but the gradient from better to worse is also real. And this would be detectable by a machine. It would be detectable by an alien. It is detectable by people. And that is actually at the heart of what we call beauty. Now, I said I wasn't going to share everything with you because I'm actually even working on a proposal for next year's Venice Biennale for the Greek Pavilion. I had already represented Greece in 2000. We're doing something called invisible architectures and four-dimensional geometries and all the rest. I'm going to go very quickly now. There's the proposition I'm building has to do with AI and AR, augmented reality, and VR, and all of it together as XR. And it observes that the book Ulysses by James Joyce is 100 years old since its publication. And Xenakis, whom Lev also mentioned, would have been 100. It's 100 years. It will be 100 years since his birth. And if you look here, you want to catch the words. Allotropic is a play on Ulysses, Odysseus, the figure who's called polytropic in Homer. And the allotope is a variation of Xenakis's word polytope. But the key word here is 2122. I'm proposing the piece for 2022, looking backward 100 years and forward 100 years. And I'm wondering, what can we make in 2022 for 2122? So the components are Ulysses, but in XR, and Xenakis, the centenary, and this notion of going from a polytope to an allotope. There's much, much more to this. But here's where it comes down, and I'm finishing up now. How can we collaborate with AI to create rare works that can impact centuries? How do you make a work that takes as long to comprehend as it takes to read and comprehend James Joyce's Ulysses, because everything we've been making is consumable like cotton candy, like bubble gum. But in humanity's history, we have made works that are long and difficult and lasting, and we need to also do that with these new technologies. So is AI art a challenge to human creativity? No, it's just symbiotic allo art by and for symbiotic allo creativity. It's just another creature, and we can work with it or we can fight with it, but it's not a challenge to human creativity that will persist. What are the aesthetics for it? Well, I think that it has something to do with searching and finding the rare exemplar. And what can it teach? What can AI art teach AI ethics? Well, it might teach something like this: the habit of infinite making in the ever-generative rainforest of enacted ideas. And what this means is the rainforest, not the desert, fecundity, sustainability, biology, the living world, and the persistence of the world to generate more world in balance, not always in peace, but always in balance, which is what we need to do. The last century was all about breaking the world. I think this century needs a new avant-garde that is all about making the world, about recuperating the lost whole, and about healing things, and about making the world a richer place and fixing the things that we broke. So Entangled, AllobioEcologies, Latent architectures and liquid space, that's where we started. And all of that's happening. It's happening very, very fast. There's going to be turbulence. There is already turbulence. We lived it. The pandemic is it. And there's this final little funny thing. If I go to the gym with my robot and I'm going to the gym, but the robot can lift weights. When I say, well, you lift the weights. Well, the robot lifts the weights. Well, that doesn't do me any good, because the point of the gym is for me to lift the weights. And it's the same thing with the AI. The point of the AI is not for it to make my life easier. It's for it to help make me stronger. And that's it. Turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelt. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Marcus, for your inspiring talk. So because the time limits, we will leave your questions to the panel talk, and
That's
we
fine.
hope to see you later.
Yeah.
Thank you.